talk about the basics of variables in PHP. So I just went to php.net and their documentation on variables, and I grabbed some of these examples that they have on the page and loaded them up into PHPStorm so we can take a look at them. So the basics are that variables in PHP are represented by a $sign followed by the name of the variable. The variable names are case sensitive, and variable names can only start with a letter or an underscore, followed by any number of letters, numbers, or underscores. So to take and see some examples, line 9, we have var equals Bob. Line 10 is the same characters except for there's an uppercase V. So this is showing that they are actually different. So let's run the debugger so we can take a look at that. So we broke here on line 9, so we're going to run that. And we can see that var is now equal to Bob. Capital var is now equal to Joe. And if we output both of those variables, we can in fact see var is Joe and var is Bob. So they are case sensitive. The next line, the one I have commented out here, is it's invalid because it starts with a 4. So if we add an underscore in front of that 4, it makes it valid. And then line 15, PHPStorm is kind of got this gray highlight. Let me stop the debugger. And mousing over it, it'll say, hey, there's non-ASCII characters used in this identifier. And PHP is okay with that. Just, I probably wouldn't want to do that. It's not a great practice. But also another, like PHP will highlight that this is not, it doesn't say it's not a valid name, but it's confused because, it's expecting a semicolon after this because it doesn't understand what this means. And PHPStorm is also noting that this is a redundant closing tag. Don't need that. All right. Let's move on to references. So by default, there's assignment by value, which means if you set a variable name and assign it a value, then this variable now contains that value. But you can also give it a reference. So line 6, we have the bar variable, and we give it a reference to foo using the ampersand character. So we can run the debugger on this one and see what's happening here. All right, we assigned Bob to foo. We assigned the reference of foo to bar. So the debugger is showing that both variables now, foo and bar, both equal Bob. Line 9 is going to take and insert the variable bar into this string. So it's going to create my name is Bob, and then assign that string into bar. So bar doesn't have a value, it's got a reference. So what do you think is going to happen? Let's see. All right, so since it has a reference, it took this variable, this string, my name is Bob, and passed it into this variable foo, my name is Bob. You can see up here that it updated. But of course, bar is referencing foo, so if you ask bar what it is, it's going to say my name is Bob also. And you can see that they're both the same up here. All right, now the page also talks about defaults. So in PHP, you don't have to define a variable before you use it, although it's a very good practice to do so. So this example shows that, yes, like we can have an unset variable in here and we can dump it out. So let's run the debugger. And the debugger is not gonna be happy with this one because nothing happened to it. it's still unset at this point. When it dump it out, it's just null. This one here, it evaluates this unset variable, and it evaluates to a Boolean false, which through this operator. We can get into that later, but basically the output is false, and I can show you that in a minute. But when we come down to this next one, it is taking the unset string variable, and it is concatenating this ABC string literal to it, but it's also assigning it. So that creates this variable. And then when we dump it out, well, we can see right here that it now has the value ABC in it. So the same thing happens with the integer. It's taking, since it hasn't been defined, it basically defaults to 0, as it can show in this comment here. And then it adds 25 to it, which gives you a total of 25. And then it assigns that value into this variable. So once we dump it out, once we do that, it has a value. So we see we ran that line, and now the unset integer has a value 25. Same exact thing happens with this one, except for it's a float. All right, this is an array, so the array isn't defined, but we're going to say the index 3 of this array is going to equal the string def. So when we run that line, you can see what it says, empty array plus array 3 def equals an array 3 def. There you go. So this one is an object, and it's assigning the foo property to equal the string bar. So the object wasn't created, but PHP is more than happy to create the object, create the property, and you can see right here we have an object with foo and bar. All right, so PHP handles all this without, it'll throw notices when you run it. Actually, let me show you that. So if we just run this script, by default, PHP is going to throw a bunch of notices, like the undefined variable. It's going to print all this out. You can, let me scroll up. So on line 3, right, the unset variable, var dump outputted null. And for the unset Boolean, it output false. And the rest of them, like we already saw. All right, so why this is a problem is you can run into situations where you might have something like this, where you have some file that is working with variables. Like this is very simplified, and I just went ahead and initialized all these variables with values. But you could have, a lot of procedural code that uses these variables on purpose or by accident. Like, you could have a name here, and you have a name in this file, and you use the same variable name in both files, but they're not actually related. So you could, inadvertently set variables. Here, let me run the debugger. So you run through all this code, and it gets a lot of variables set, and then you include another part of code to add functionality. But when it goes into running through that code, now look, this variable, instead of being unset, has the value hello in it. This unset bool, it was true now. So all your output, or in this case, all the output's going to be different because of previous code that had already run. So it's one example why it's not a good idea to have unset variables in your code. And there's other ways to fix it, like namespaces and classes and stuff we'll get into later, but this is the example from the documentation, and they wanted to point this out of uninitialized variables are problematic. All right, well, thanks for watching, and hope to see you next time.